17 years of sweat and grit building peak pulse logistics, and they tossed me out like yesterday's trash for some damn software. I'm Stephen Caldwell, 43 years old, the guy who turned their chaotic fleet into a well-oiled machine. But today, Brandon Hayes, my boss, sat in his fancy Denver office and told me I was no longer needed. 17 years of staying up late, tracking shipments through blizzards. 17 years of earning the trust of big clients like Caldwell Meats and Donovan Dairy, all erased in a single sentence. The new software will save $250,000 a year, Brandon declared, eyes glued to his laptop screen, like I was just a number in his charts. I sat there, heart pounding, feeling like an 18-wheeler had just run me over. Next to him, Kyle Ramsey, the operations director, fidgeted awkwardly, avoiding my gaze. They thought a string of code could replace me, replace the routes I'd mapped by hand, the relationships I'd built, the times I saved the company from disaster. But I didn't yell or slam the table. I just nodded, like everything was fine, while inside, a fire started to burn. As I left that office, carrying a folder with 17 years of know-how, I knew this wasn't the end. Peak Pulse would soon see their mistake, and I'd make them pay, not with fists, but with the very thing they underestimated, my expertise. The room was dead quiet, save for the rhythmic tapping of Brandon's keyboard, cold and mechanical. I sat across from him on a leather chair, trying to keep my face steady, but each word he spoke cut like a knife. We've uploaded all the routes and client specs to the system. Kyle chimed in, his voice shaky, eyes fixed on some spot on the glass wall. This software's 25% more efficient than human management. I wanted to laugh, but not because it was funny. More efficient? I'd spent a decade learning how to dodge traffic jams on I-70, knowing Officer Daniels set up speed traps on Highway 85 every Tuesday, or that Caldwell Meats would refuse deliveries if they were even 5 minutes late. Did their software know that? Did it know Donovan Dairy would lose thousands if a truck let milk sit for over 30 minutes? I stayed silent, but in my head, I was listing everything they were about to screw up. Brandon looked up, finally meeting my eyes, but his gaze was empty, like I was just a task to check off. We need you to train Connor over the next 2 weeks, to hand over any remaining processes, he said. Connor, 22-year-old kid, fresh out of some Ivy League school, hired to push buttons when the system gave orders. I nodded. Sure thing. But inside, I thought Connor will never get how to handle a snowstorm, blocking the pass, or what to say when Carter Vaughn calls at midnight demanding answers. The termination letter lay on the desk, printed on crisp white paper, with the severance figure, 2 weeks' pay for each year served. Fair on paper, but it didn't cover what I'd poured into Peak Pulse. I stood, shook hands with Brandon and Kyle, feeling their limp, half-hearted grips. As I walked out, the hum of Peak Pulse's Denver headquarters felt different, like the building itself was turning its back on me. My office was a cramped corner, on the 3rd floor, cluttered with memories. On my desk was a photo of Mason and Lily, my kids, grinning at a Rockies game. Next to it was an old leather logbook, where I'd jotted down every client's quirks over the years. Donovan Dairy's pressure valves, that leaked if left too long. Caldwell Meats' 4 a.m. delivery schedule. Evergreen Organics' demand to avoid diesel-choked highways. That logbook, along with a folder of hand-optimized routes, ones I'd spent years refining to shave hours off deliveries, by dodging traffic patterns GPS missed, went into my bag. Nobody stopped me to ask what I was taking. A few coworkers dropped by, offering clumsy handshakes and empty promises to keep in touch, but I knew they were just going through the motions. Only Sophie Bennett, a dispatcher with sharp eyes, lingered at my door. Her arms were crossed, her voice thick with frustration. "Who am I supposed to call when everything goes to hell now, Stephen?" she asked. Sophie and I had tackled countless crises together, from trucks stuck in snow to clients screaming about late deliveries. "You've got the software," I said, forcing a half smile. 25% more efficient, right? She rolled her eyes. "That thing won't know what to do when Donovan's valves leak, or Caldwell's dock manager throws a fit over a half-hour delay. You know that." I patted her shoulder, the weight of her words sinking into my chest. "It'll figure it out," I said, but we both knew it was a lie. As I left, I passed the glass-walled boardroom, where Brandon was pitching to the executive team. Through the window, I saw colorful charts flashing cost savings, efficiency spikes, ROI. I wondered if they'd factored in the cost of losing the trust I'd built with clients from Fort Collins to Albuquerque. I didn't slam doors or make a scene. I just carried my cardboard box to my truck, set it on the passenger seat, and drove through Denver's icy streets, toward home in Littleton. The sky was gray, snow falling lightly, but inside me, a fire was smoldering. This wasn't the end. No way in hell. I started at Peak Pulse, back when it was called Whitaker Freight, in 2000, when the company was just 12 trucks and a scrappy dream. Old man Whitaker hired me himself. This business runs on relationships and reliability. Stephen, he said, his voice rough from chain smoking. Tech changes, but people don't. Those words stuck with me as I built our logistics system from scratch. I learned every client's needs, like they were family. Caldwell Meats needed beef delivered by dawn for the morning prep. Donovan Dairy required unloading within 30 minutes, or their pressure valves would leak, costing thousands in spoiled product. Evergreen Organics demanded routes that steered clear of diesel-heavy highways to keep their organic veggies pure. I knew these things because I'd spent years earning their trust, proving Peak Pulse was more than just another trucking outfit. When Whitaker retired 7 years ago, his son Brandon Hayes took over. Fresh from Stanford with an MBA, Brandon was obsessed with disruption and optimization. Slick-suited consultants swarmed the office, bringing cost-cutting plans and endless hype about automation. I watched it unfold, kept my head down, and did my job. Drivers like Grayson Reed trusted me to have their backs when a route went south. Clients like Carter Vaughn called me directly when issues popped up. I thought that mattered. My wife Allison saw the shift before I did. "They're phasing you out, Stephen," she said, one night in our Littleton kitchen, after I mentioned the tech team taking over my reports. "You should start looking elsewhere." I brushed it off. Nobody knows this system like I do. They need me. But I was wrong. Quarterly meetings where I used to present logistics metrics were now run by the tech team. My emails to Brandon went unanswered. Kyle started making fleet decisions without looping me in. 2 weeks before they fired me, I got a call from Owen Fletcher, operations manager at Summit Transport, Peak Pulse's biggest rival in Aurora. "Just checking in," he said, his tone friendly, like we were old buddies. "Heard Peak Pulse is shaking things up. Coffee sometime." I told him I was fine, loyal to a fault, but that loyalty didn't save me. When I pulled into our Littleton driveway that afternoon, snow was piling up on the lawn. Allison was still at her accounting job, and Lily, our 4-year-old daughter, was at daycare. Mason, my 16-year-old son, was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He looked up as I set the box down, his eyes narrowed.
"You're home early, Dad,"
he said, sitting up. I didn't sugarcoat it. "I got fired, Mason. They're using new software to replace me." His face fell, a mix of worry and frustration. "What about money? School's expensive, and my science project." His voice trailed off. Mason was pouring his heart into a drone delivery project for a regional competition, something he was passionate about, but the parts weren't cheap, and I'd been footing the bill. "We'll figure it out," I said, ruffling his hair. Though my own uncertainty gnawed at me. "You focus on that project. I know you'll kill it." Allison got home an hour later, her coat dusted with snow. I told her everything in the kitchen, the kids' drawings pinned to the fridge behind us, a reminder of what was at stake. She wasn't surprised, her eyes steady, but searching. "What now, Stephen?" she asked, setting her bag down. "I'll take some time, figure things out," I said, but my mind was already elsewhere.
Dad.
That night, after Mason and Lily were asleep, I sat at the dining table with a cold cup of coffee, staring at the folder of routes I'd brought home. These weren't just maps or schedules, they were 17 years of know-how, of knowing that Caldwell Meats Doc wouldn't take deliveries during lunch, or that Grayson Reed needed to avoid downtown Denver.
Dad.
Rush hour. The software couldn't know those things. It couldn't understand the people I'd spent my career serving. As I flipped through the pages, a quiet resolve took hold. Peak Pulse thought I was expendable, but I'd prove them wrong. This was just the beginning. 2 weeks after Peak Pulse Logistics kicked me to the curb, my phone buzzed and Owen Fletcher's friendly voice came through from the other end. "Heard you had a rough day, Stephen," he said, like we were just chatting about a Rockies game. Owen was the operations manager at Summit Transport, Peak Pulse's biggest rival in Aurora, and this call was no accident. I sat at the dining table in our Littleton home, snow piling up outside the window, still digesting getting fired after 17 years of busting my ass. "Want to grab coffee?" Owen asked. "Summit could use someone like you." I hesitated, a flicker of loyalty to Peak Pulse still lingering somewhere. But then I pictured Brandon Hayes and his cold stare as he handed me the termination letter. All right, I said. Blue Ridge Diner, Wednesday, 10 a.m. When I hung up, I felt a spark, not hope, but opportunity. Peak Pulse thought they could replace me with software, but I was about to prove them wrong. The folder of routes sat on the table, 17 years of know-how packed into those pages, and I knew it was a weapon no software could match. Wednesday morning, I drove through Denver's icy streets, the air biting cold, my breath fogging in the chill. Blue Ridge Diner sat on the edge of downtown, a classic American joint with red vinyl booths and the rich smell of fresh coffee. Owen was already there, tucked in a quiet corner, wearing a simple blue button-up, flipping through the menu. Been a while, Stephen, he said, flashing a genuine smile as I slid into the booth. We'd met at a logistics conference in Boulder back in 2019, when Owen was still with a smaller outfit. I remembered him pulling me aside to debate tech. He believed it was a tool, not a replacement for people. Heard about the mess at Peak Pulse, Owen said, his voice lowering. New software, huh? Sounds like a disaster waiting to happen. I shrugged, but couldn't hide a bitter smirk. They think it's 25% better than me. Coffee arrived, steaming in white ceramic mugs, and Owen got to the point. Summit needs someone who knows logistics inside out, not just numbers on a screen. You in, consulting to start, and if it clicks, we'll talk long-term. I took a sip, the warmth spreading, but my mind was racing. Working for Summit Transport meant turning my back on Peak Pulse, where I'd spent nearly 2 decades. But then I thought of Kyle Ramsey, too spineless to look me in the eye, when he delivered the news, and Brandon, with his flashy charts in the boardroom. They'd chosen software over me. Now I'd choose myself. I don't want to burn bridges, I said, my voice cautious, but I'm willing to give it a shot. Owen nodded, his eyes showing he got it. No need to burn bridges, just show us what you can do. Driving home, my phone pinged. A text from Tessa Morgan, a veteran Peak Pulse driver who'd helped me navigate plenty of urgent deliveries. Today was a shit show, Stephen. Software sent 3 trucks to the same Caldwell meats dock. Beef sat out for 45 minutes. No refrigeration. They're pissed. I read the message, feeling a mix of heartache and satisfaction. Heartache for clients like Carter Vaughn, who I'd worked with for a decade, now dealing with this mess. Satisfaction because Peak Pulse was digging its own grave. I texted back, what else? Tessa replied instantly. Nevin delivered 2 hours late. Pressure valves leaked. Whole batch ruined. Sophie says she's losing her mind. Sophie Bennett, Peak Pulse's dispatcher, was the only one who'd fought my firing. I pictured her cussing out the software in the control room, and a faint smile crossed my lips. Peak Pulse was crumbling, and I hadn't lifted a finger. That night, I sat with Mason in our Littleton garage, where he was tinkering with a drone for his science project. Wires and components were scattered across the workbench, the desk lamp casting light on his focused face. I think it could deliver packages faster than any truck, Mason said, holding up a small propeller for inspection. But I need another sensor to dodge obstacles. It's pricey. I looked at him, remembering the worry in his eyes, when I told him I'd been fired. You keep at it, I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. I'll cover the cost. But you've got to give it everything, okay? Don't let anything stop you. Mason nodded, his eyes lighting up. Like you're doing, Dad. Question caught me off guard. Yeah. I thought of the route folder, the meeting with Owen, and nodded. Yeah, Mason, just like me. I started at Summit Transport, the next week, at their Aurora office, a sleek building with glass windows overlooking the highway. Owen gave me a tour, introducing me to the team. Folks who cared about getting deliveries right, not just crunching numbers. We want to serve clients like Caldwell Meats, or Evergreen Organics, Owen said, leading me to a conference room. But we need to know what they really want. I opened my route folder, spreading the pages across the table. Evergreen needs routes that avoid Highway 85, I explained. Diesel fumes from trucks ruin their organic produce. I mapped this one in 2015. Saves 3 hours per trip. Owen looked at me, impressed. You're a goldmine, Stephen. Over the next few days, I dove in, applying everything I'd learned at Peak Pulse. I redrew routes for Summit, ensuring Caldwell Meats beef arrived before dawn, and suggested fast unloading schedules for Donovan Dairy. Every decision came from 17 years of experience, something Peak Pulse's software could never replicate. But I wasn't just working for a paycheck. Every route I optimized, every client I helped Summit win, was a jab at Peak Pulse. I didn't need to sabotage them. They were doing it to themselves. One evening, Tessa called. Stephen, you won't believe this, she said, her voice dripping with frustration. Today the software routed a truck through downtown Denver at rush hour. Took 2 hours to get out. Caldwell Meats is threatening to pull their contract. I sat in the living room, listening to Tessa vent, that mix of satisfaction creeping back. What else? I asked. Sophie says Brandon's holding emergency meetings with the tech team, trying to fix the software. But it keeps screwing up. Clients are livid. I thanked Tessa, hung up, and stared out the window, where snow fell quietly. Peak Pulse was paying the price, and I was just getting started. I thought back to meeting Owen at that Boulder Logistics conference in 2019. I'd been presenting on optimizing routes for perishable goods, and Owen pulled me aside after the session. You think tech's gonna replace us? He asked, holding a coffee cup. I laughed. It can help, but it'll never replace people. You can't program a client's trust. Owen nodded, and we talked for hours about the industry, about companies blindly chasing tech and screwing themselves. That's when I knew he wasn't like Brandon. Owen valued people. Today's meeting at Blue Ridge Diner was the fruit of that connection, and I knew I'd picked the right guy to work with. That weekend, I took Mason to a Denver electronics store to buy a sensor for his drone. I wanted to navigate any obstacle, he said, his eyes gleaming as he examined an expensive model. Like how you avoid traffic jams on I-70. I chuckled. Exactly. Back home, Mason worked late into the night, and I sat nearby, offering tips on optimizing the drone's flight path. Drawing from my logistics experience, watching him, I saw a piece of myself, someone who wouldn't back down, who'd find a way through any roadblock. You're gonna win that competition, I said, and Mason grinned. Like you're winning against Peak Pulse. I nodded, a surge of pride hitting me. In the days that followed, I started sketching out a new system for Summit Transport, a way to blend tech with human expertise. I called it the Caldwell Protocol, after my last name, a reminder that this was built on 17 years of sweat and tears. It wasn't just software or routes, it was understanding clients, knowing what they needed in ways no machine could predict. Owen reviewed the first draft, and nodded. This is a game changer, Stephen, he said. I smiled, but inside, I knew this wasn't just a start for Summit. It was the first blow against Peak Pulse, and I wouldn't stop until they felt the full weight of underestimating me. 3 months after Peak Pulse Logistics threw me out like trash, my phone rang, and Carter Vaughn's gruff, pissed-off voice came through. Stephen, we need to talk, he said, cutting straight to the chase. Carter was the CEO of Caldwell Meats, Peak Pulse's biggest client, and I'd worked with him for a decade, making sure every slab of beef arrived on time, at the right temperature. Their damn software's screwing everything up, he growled. Late deliveries, meat sitting out for an hour. We're done with Peak Pulse. I stood in my small office at Summit Transport in Aurora, gripping the phone, my heart racing. What do you want, Carter? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I want to work with you, he said. You're at Summit, right? We're ready to sign. I took a deep breath, feeling like I'd just landed a knockout punch on Peak Pulse without lifting a finger. Carter wasn't alone. Jenna Holt from Donovan Dairy called right after, bitching about spoiled milk from late deliveries. Evergreen Organics reached out too, demanding the clean routes I used to run. Peak Pulse's top clients were jumping ship to Summit Transport, and I was the reason. But just when I thought I'd won, Brandon Hayes played dirty. He threatened to sue me for sharing trade secrets. I wasn't scared. He had no evidence, and I knew I'd make him regret it. The meeting with Carter happened at the Aspen Grill, a swanky restaurant in downtown Denver, with warm golden lights and the faint smell of grilled steak in the air. I got there early, sitting at a corner table, looking out the window where snow glittered under the streetlights. Carter walked in, his gray suit rumpled, his face flushed with anger. I can't believe Peak Pulse, he said, dropping into the chair and ordering a bourbon straight away. Tuesday, they sent 2 trucks to the same dock, clogged everything up. Beef sat out for 50 minutes, no refrigeration. I lost the whole batch. I nodded, keeping my cool, but inside, I was grinning. Brandon's software was torching Peak Pulse, just like I'd predicted. Summit can do better, I said, sliding a plan across the table. This route gets your beef there by 4 a.m., right on your schedule. Carter skimmed it, his eyes softening. You always knew what we needed, Stephen. I want a contract signed next week. I smiled, raising my coffee mug. Thanks, Carter. You won't be disappointed. Jenna Holt called that night, her voice all business. Stephen, Donovan Dairy needs you. Pulse's software ruined 3 milk batches this week. Pressure valves leaked from late deliveries. Can you do what you used to? I reassured her, promising Summit would deliver on time, with the right process. Evergreen Organics was next, demanding routes that avoided Highway 85 to protect their organic produce. I pulled out my route folder, those pages holding 17 years of know-how, and redrew schedules for Summit. Every client that switched was a knife in Peak Pulse's back, and I didn't have to do anything but be myself, the guy Brandon underestimated. But Brandon didn't sit still. One morning, I got an email from Peak Pulse's lawyer, accusing me of sharing proprietary information with Summit Transport. He threatened a lawsuit, demanding millions in damages. I sat in Summit's office, reading the email, and laughed. He thought he could scare me. I hadn't taken anything but my route folder, stuff I'd created myself, not Peak Pulse's property. Owen Fletcher walked in, saw my face, and asked, "What's up?" I handed him the laptop. "Brandon's losing it," I said. "He knows he's done for." Owen read the email, smirking. "He's got nothing. Let our lawyers handle it." And they did. The lawsuit collapsed in less than a week. No evidence, just a desperate stunt from Brandon. When I heard, I felt relief, but more than that, satisfaction. Peak Pulse wasn't just losing clients, they were losing their reputation. Meanwhile, I finalized the Caldwell Protocol at Summit Transport. It wasn't just a logistics system, it was a blend of tech and human expertise, the kind of thing Peak Pulse ignored. I wrote every step, from optimizing routes to handling crises like blizzards blocking I-70. "This is the future," Owen said, reviewing the final draft, his eyes gleaming. "We're rolling it out to every client." Summit started using the Caldwell Protocol, and the results were instant. Caldwell Meats got their beef on time. Donovan Dairy had no more leaks. Evergreen Organics raved about the clean routes. I stood in Summit's Aurora control room, watching screens track trucks moving on my schedules, and felt like I'd found myself again. Peak Pulse could take my job, but not my worth. Peak Pulse's collapse was getting uglier. Tessa Morgan called one night, her voice heavy with disgust. "Steven, I quit," she said. "Peak Pulse is a mess. Yesterday, the software sent a truck down a restricted road in Denver. Brighton Foods canceled their contract." I wasn't surprised. "What's next for you?" I asked. "I want in at Summit," Tessa said. "You're there, right? I trust you over that damn software any day." I chuckled, telling her to call Owen. A few days later, Sophie Bennett texted, "I'm done, Steven." Brandon's screaming, at everyone. Kyle's hiding in his office. "I want to join Summit." I passed her info to Owen, and soon, both Tessa and Sophie were on Summit's team, bringing their skills and loyalty. Peak Pulse wasn't just losing clients, they were losing the people who kept the company afloat. I thought back to a meeting in 2024, when Brandon called me outdated in front of the whole executive team. I was presenting a route optimization for Evergreen Organics, explaining why Highway 85 wouldn't work. Brandon cut me off, his voice dripping with contempt. "Steven, we're in the 21st century. Software's gonna outdo your old school methods." The room went silent, and I swallowed my anger, finishing my pitch. That day, I vowed to prove him wrong. Now, with Carter Vaughn, Jenna Holt, and Evergreen Organics choosing Summit, with Tessa and Sophie by my side, I knew I had. Brandon wasn't just wrong, he was paying for it. One chilly afternoon, my phone rang, and Brandon's number popped up. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. "Steven," he said, his voice hoarse, stripped of its usual arrogance. "We need you back. The software, it's not working like we thought. You could consult, fix it." I stood outside Summit's office, snow sparkling under the streetlights, and laughed. "Brandon, you picked software over me," I said, my voice steady. "Now live with it." I hung up, no regrets. He thought I'd bail out Peak Pulse after everything. No chance. I'd built a new future at Summit, with the Caldwell Protocol, and a team that valued me. I didn't need Peak Pulse anymore. I'd set myself free. A year after Peak Pulse Logistics fired me, I stood in Summit Transport's control room in Aurora, watching massive screens track trucks moving along routes powered by the Caldwell Protocol. Those blue lines on the map, routes I'd drawn by hand, honed over 17 years, were now the heartbeat of a company dominating Colorado's logistics industry. Summit Transport had just bought up what was left of Peak Pulse, a shell of its former self after catastrophic mistakes. I didn't have to destroy them. Brandon Hayes and his damn software did that all on their own. But the real victory wasn't watching Peak Pulse crumble. It was stepping into my office as Summit's Senior Director of Logistics, with Sophie Bennett and Tessa Morgan by my side, a trusted team and my family, Allison, Mason, and Lily, smiling back home. I'd proven my worth, not just to Peak Pulse, but to myself. And when Brandon called, begging me to come back, his voice trembling with defeat, I knew justice had been served, not with fists, but with the truth. The acquisition went down fast, but it wasn't smooth. I remember the morning Owen Fletcher walked into my Aurora office, a stack of papers in hand. "Summit just bought Peak Pulse," he said, a half smile on his face. "Well, what's left of it? A few trucks, a warehouse, and a pile of debt." I leaned back in my chair, feeling like I'd just finished a marathon. "They went bankrupt?" I asked. Owen nodded. "Brandon's software drove off nearly every client. Caldwell Meats, Donovan Dairy, Evergreen Organics. They're all with us now. He's got nothing." I looked out the window, snow blanketing the highway, and thought back to the day I left Peak Pulse, clutching my route folder. That folder had become the Caldwell Protocol, a human-centered logistics system, and I was the one leading it. The merger turned Summit's Aurora headquarters into a beehive. Technicians inspected Peak Pulse's beat-up trucks, warehouse staff logged data, and I worked with Owen to integrate the new team. Sophie Bennett was the first I called. "Sophie, you want to keep dispatching?" I asked over the phone. She laughed hard. "With you, Steven? Hell yeah. I'm sick of Brandon's stupid software." Tessa Morgan was quick to sign on too. "Summit's my new home," she said when we met in the conference room. "You do things right, Steven. I'm here for you." Seeing Sophie and Tessa, two people who'd weathered Peak Pulse's chaos with me, in the control room, directing trucks with confidence, felt like my family had grown. We built a company culture rooted in people, not code. Every morning, I walked into the office, saw Sophie barking into a radio to fix a route, or Tessa chatting with drivers about dodging I-70 traffic, and knew I'd found where I belonged. But the real moment of justice came when Brandon Hayes showed up. One freezing afternoon, I was reviewing delivery schedules when Owen knocked on my door. "You've got a visitor," he said, his eyes unreadable. I walked to the meeting room and saw Brandon, wearing a wrinkled suit, his face gaunt, no trace of his old arrogance. "Steven," he started, his voice shaky. "I was wrong. The software was a mistake. You were the one keeping things running." I stood there, arms crossed, letting him keep going. "I want to make it right. You could work with us, even just consulting. Your name would be at the top." I laughed, not out of amusement, but because I couldn't believe he had the nerve to ask after everything. "Brandon," I said, my voice calm, "you chose software over me. You called me outdated. Now look who's standing here." He lowered his head, silent. "Summit's my home," I went on. "Want advice? Hire good people, and listen to them." I turned and walked out, leaving him with his own silence. He'd lost, and I didn't have to do anything but live by my values. Kyle Ramsey was a different story. When Summit took over, Kyle was kept on, but in a lower role, reporting to me. The first time we met again, he was nervous, avoiding my eyes. "Steven, I'm sorry," he said, his voice quiet. "I was just following Brandon's orders." I nodded, not saying much. "Do your job well, Kyle," I replied. "We've got work to do." He nodded, and from then on, worked hard, like he was trying to make amends. I didn't forgive him outright, but I didn't hold a grudge either. Justice wasn't about vengeance. It was about setting things right. Back home, things were looking up. Mason, my son, was brighter than ever. His drone delivery project won first place at the regional competition, and he wouldn't stop talking about tweaking the design. "Dad, I think I can make it faster," he said one night in the kitchen, as we ate dinner with Allison and Lily. Allison smiled, resting her hand on mine. "You did it, Steven," she said, her eyes warm. "We're okay now." I looked around the table, saw Mason grinning, Lily scribbling on a napkin, and felt a peace I hadn't known in years. My job at Summit didn't just bring in money, it brought stability for my family. I bought Mason a new sensor for his drone, and Allison didn't have to stress about bills anymore. We even started planning a vacation to Yellowstone, a trip we'd put off for too long. I often thought about Old Man Whitaker, the founder of Whitaker Freight, Peak Pulse's predecessor. In 2008, when he hired me, he said something I never forgot. "This business runs on relationships and reliability, Steven. Tech changes, but people don't." He sat in his cramped office, cigarette smoke curling around him, telling stories about driving trucks through blizzards. "Clients don't remember software," he said. "They remember the guy who kept his word." That lesson guided me through 17 years. And now, it was the foundation of the Caldwell Protocol. I'd kept my word to Carter Vaughn, Jenna Holt, and every Summit client. I'd kept my word to my family. And I'd kept my word to myself, that I wouldn't let Peak Pulse define my worth. The Caldwell Protocol wasn't just Summit's internal system anymore. It was spreading, becoming an industry standard. Companies from Wyoming to New Mexico called, asking how to implement it. Trade magazines wrote about me, calling me the man who beat automation. I didn't care about the fame. But I was proud, not for the money or the director title, but because I'd proven what Whitaker always knew. People matter more than code. One morning, I stood in the control room, watching Sophie and Tessa at work, seeing trucks follow my routes on the screens. Owen clapped me on the shoulder. "You did it, Stephen," he said. I nodded, a deep satisfaction settling in. Peak Pulse was wrong, and I was right. Not by tearing them down, but by building something better. I looked out at the snow-covered highway, thinking about that Yellowstone trip with Allison and the kids, and knew I hadn't just won. I'd found myself again. I stood in Summit Transport's control room in Aurora, the glow from massive screens lighting up my face, showing the blue lines of the Caldwell Protocol, the logistics system I built from 17 years of sweat and grit. Those lines snaked across the map, from Denver to Cheyenne, proof of what I'd always believed. People, not machines, are the heart of this industry. A year ago, I walked out of Peak Pulse Logistics with a cardboard box and a folder of routes, called outdated by Brandon Hayes, and replaced by his damn software. Now Peak Pulse was bankrupt. Their biggest clients, Caldwell Meats, Donovan Dairy, Evergreen Organics, were with Summit, and I was Senior Director of Logistics, leading a team I trusted. But the real victory wasn't the title or the paycheck. It was Mason's proud grin as he talked about his drone project, Allison's smile as we planned a Yellowstone getaway, and the peace of knowing I'd found myself again. Justice didn't come from revenge, it came from sticking to what's right, and I'd proven human value can't ever be replaced. Every morning, I stepped into the control room, where the air buzzed like a baseball stadium before a big game. Huge screens hung on the walls, tracking every truck, every route, every delivery in real time, with Caldwell Protocol flashing in the corner. Sophie Bennett, the veteran dispatcher, barked into her radio, rerouting a truck when a blizzard blocked I-70. Tessa Morgan, a former driver now managing the fleet, stood nearby, chatting with the driver about dodging traffic on Highway 85. I watched them, two people who'd left Peak Pulse to join me, and felt like we weren't just co-workers, we were family. Owen Fletcher, the guy who gave me a shot when I hit rock bottom, would swing by, clapping me on the shoulder. "Stephen, you know you've changed this place, right?" he said one morning, as we watched a truck hit Caldwell Meats right on time. "This is your company as much as mine." I smiled but didn't say much. Summit wasn't just a job, it was proof of what I'd built from the ashes of Peak Pulse. Our clients couldn't have been happier. One day, Carter Vaughn from Caldwell Meats called. "Stephen, I've never seen deliveries this on point," he said, his voice brimming with excitement. "Your routes are gold. This morning's beef hit at 3:45 a.m. Exactly what I need." I grinned, thanking him, but in my head, I pictured the times Peak Pulse botched Carter's orders, leaving meat sitting out for an hour. Jenna Holt from Donovan Dairy texted thanking me for zero-pressure valve leaks. "You saved us, Stephen," she wrote. Evergreen Organics sent a long email, raving about clean routes free of diesel-choked highways. Every thank you was a nail in the coffin Peak Pulse had built for itself, but I didn't need to gloat. I just did my job, the job Brandon thought software could do better. Summit Transport didn't just grow, it exploded. After buying Peak Pulse's scraps, we opened a new warehouse in Fort Collins, hired more drivers, and signed deals with companies from Wyoming to New Mexico. The Caldwell Protocol became a buzzword in logistics, hailed by trade magazines as a game changer. One article called me the man who beat automation, but I didn't care about the spotlight. I was proud because I'd kept my word to clients, my team, and myself. Every truck moving on those screens was a reminder. People, not code, make the difference. I'd stand in the control room, watching the blue lines pulse, and think back to the day I left Peak Pulse, clutching my route folder. That day, it felt like the world was caving in. Now I stood here, leading a thriving company, knowing every struggle was worth it. Home was where my real strength came from. Mason, my son, was a different kid now, all smiles. His drone delivery project didn't just win regionals, it caught the eye of a tech company that wanted to fund his next steps. One night in our Littleton kitchen, Mason talked about upgrading his drone. "Dad, I want it to dodge obstacles, like how you optimize routes," he said, eyes gleaming. Allison, sitting beside me, laughed. "He's your mini-me," she said, squeezing my hand. I looked at Mason, remembering his worried eyes when I got fired, and felt a surge of pride. "Dream big, Mason," I said. "I've got your back." Allison and I were stronger than ever. She didn't have to check our bank account every night, stressing about bills. Lily, our 4-year-old, drew pictures of trucks and drones, plastering them on the fridge. Our family didn't just survive, we were thriving. We started planning a Yellowstone trip, a dream we'd shelved for too long. "I want to camp under the stars," Allison said one night, as we sat on the couch, flipping through park brochures. Mason can test his drone there. And Lily will love spotting bison. I nodded, picturing us on Wyoming trails, far from Denver's grind. Yellowstone wasn't just a vacation. It was a symbol of the balance I'd reclaimed. I wasn't the guy burning out at peak pulse, desperate to prove himself anymore. I was Stephen Caldwell, logistics director, dad, husband, a man who knew life wasn't just work. It was moments with the ones you love. I often thought about the day I got fired. When Brandon handed me the termination letter, and Kyle couldn't meet my eyes. I left Peak Pulse's Denver office with a box, feeling like I'd lost everything. That day, snow fell thick, and I drove back to Littleton, wondering if I could start over. I did, not by getting even, but by pushing forward. I remembered sitting with my route folder that night, realizing 17 years of know-how was something no one could take. From that folder, I built the Caldwell Protocol, turned Summit Transport into a powerhouse, and proved people matter more than machines. That journey taught me justice doesn't come from bitterness. It comes from doing what's right, even when the world's against you. The biggest lesson I want to share is that human value can't be replaced. In a world obsessed with tech, it's easy to forget that trust, grit, and relationships keep things running. I proved it at Summit, with my team, my clients, and my family. If you're facing a tough spot, feeling overlooked, remember your worth is in what you do, not what others think. Keep going, do right, and you'll find your way, like I did. I looked out at the snow-covered highway from the control room, thinking of Yellowstone with Allison, Mason, and Lily, and knew I hadn't just won. I'd lived true to myself. Thanks for watching my story, folks. If it hit home, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss more stories of justice and grit. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear them. Together, let's keep spreading the word about what really matters, people.